Hello, everybody, and welcome to this seminar of the Migration Policy Center at the European University Institute. My name is Martin Russ, and I'm very happy to chair this seminar. I'm delighted to welcome our two speakers. Here in the room with me is Iuliia Lashchuk. She's a research fellow at the MPC here at the EUI. And we're also very happy to have online Sabrina Marchetti, who is an associate professor at Ca' Foscari University of Venice. And Sabrina and Iuliia will talk about their research for a European Union-funded research project called iClaim. And the paper that they're discussing is on domestic work and irregularity. So very welcome. As always, I will have about 25 minutes of presentation and then we'll take some questions. So over to you, Sabrina.
Hello, thank you so much for this invitation to all the organizers and the Migration Policy Center. Yes, finally, Iuliia and myself are presenting this research that we actually conducted exactly 1 year ago in the fall 2024. As you, next, as some of you are already very well aware, this ethnographic fieldwork that Iuliia and I carried out is part of a larger Horizon project called iClaim. It is one of the sibling projects of PRIME that Martin is coordinating. And at the center of our project, there is this notion of irregularity assemblages. I'm not going to take time for explaining you the rationale and the organization of the entire project but I will be happy to answer questions about it later on during the Q&A. It is important maybe next for you to know that a specific research on the issue of irregularity in the different ways in which irregularity affects workers' life, the household of the workers, the labor conditions, but also the personal and private lives, has been carried out in Italy, the Netherlands, Finland, and the United Kingdom for the specific working sector of domestic labor, cleaning and caring in private homes. For other countries, we had other labor sectors involved. So next. For those of you that are not familiar with the specific Italian context, but I also think it's always very much useful to have a quick recap on what is the context of the intertwine between migration and the employment in the specific sector of domestic work. Here are some numbers for you. And when we talk about domestic work in Italy, we talk about at the same time, as I said before, people doing cleaning, so mostly per hour cleaning in private homes, but also people doing caregiving, and also nannies in smaller numbers, but caregiving is a major issue in private homes. As you can see, the numbers, official number is more than 800,000 people, but this is only the half of the workforce which is actually employed in this sector. So half of it is estimated to be in irregular condition for what concerns the labor contract, so people without a contract. We know that among the people with a contract, so official numbers, more than a majority, almost 70% today is a foreign-born migrant origin. And as you can see, is also not very young population. Here there is some distinction between those that work as COLF, that is the cleaning, so also some Italians, Filipino, East Asian, but the Eastern European that we are going to discuss about today are mostly in the badanti, which is the Italian name usually given in everyday language to personal caregivers of elderly people. Next. irregularity is spread in this sector. This is due to the convergence of different tendencies. One of them is the preference for having, as I mentioned before, these live-in caregivers that are very much suitable for the care model that we call traditional, that is the model in Italy of the aging in place, so keeping the person in their own apartments, in their own homes, and at the same time is very functional to, in a sense, not avoid disrupting what are traditional family arrangements, especially in a gender dimension, and also to have a cheap, low-cost care provision which would be actually very costly if they will be in some institution or other type of accommodation outside the private homes. This is a specific fashion of the phenomenon, the wider phenomenon of marketization of care that has taken this specific configuration in Italy over the decades. Next. In Italy, I shall remind you that we have what we can call, what scholars have called a familialistic welfare model. So not only the care provision is directly provided by family members, but also when this is care provision, I mean, the state, let's say, intervenes in the care provision, it is usually in a way, as for example, these cash care measures that again emphasize the role of family and family relationships. So in a sense, the employment of private caregivers, the migrant living workers is again managed and by other family members that simply, in a sense, delegate to another person their own the tasks that they are expected to carry out. Next. Yes, this also intertwines with the specific organization of migration policies and of the entitlement to residence permits for domestic workers based on quotas, yearly quotas, for workers in specific sectors and workers from specific countries. So it is a very regularized arrival and employment. This is, of course, very much in principles, that in practice is very difficult for people to fit into the numbers that each quota every year is allowing. So many people do not fit in these narrow windows, and they would end up in a regular position. We know that in the Italian landscape, regularization of those that have been previously arriving or working in a regular way is a common, pretty common instrument, policy instrument, and the last one was in 2020 during the pandemic. Next. So the employers' organizations and care receivers' organizations do complain also about the fact that the quotas that are established every year by the Italian government are anyways not enough to supply workers for the actual need. We also want to mention the impact that the EU Temporary Protection Directive had on this sector, allowing again a regularization of large numbers of workers, meaning workers from Ukraine in particular, that were already present in Italy, or the arrival in regular way of new workers. Next. I think now is the methodology, so I can hand it in to Iuliia.
Yes, thank you so much, Sabrina. I will tell you a bit more about the field research that we did. It was a qualitative study based on 20 interviews with migrant women working in a domestic work sector, plus 5 follow-up interviews using object-based methods. All interviews were conducted in their native languages or in Italian, and participants for the interviews were selected through or our personal contacts or the stakeholders that we were collaborating with. We also did participant observations in different spaces where we could find these migrant women, such as information desk, trade union offices, churches, social spaces where they spend their free time, and so on. And we also had interviews and conversations with experts and stakeholders who work with those women or know them. The research took place between September and November last year in Naples and its province. A few words about the interviewees themselves. The majority come from Ukraine, also from Poland, Georgia, Belarus, and Kyrgyzstan. The youngest person was 30 years old at the moment of interview, and the oldest was 65 years old. And also interesting to see here because younger women tend to work more as kolf, so cleaners, while older women, all of them were working as domestic workers, which also represents the tendency in general. The first woman arrived in Italy, in Naples, in 1993. She was a Polish woman, which also shows us the story of those arrivals very well, because Polish women were the first to migrate. And the last woman arrived in 2022, a Ukrainian woman, because of the Russian war in Ukraine. At the moment of interview, the majority of interviewees held or residence permit for domestic work or a Temporary Protection Directive, or some of them, they also had EU citizenship, such as Polish women, or also some long-term migrants that finally obtained the EU citizenship. The mode of entry, those that arrived before, almost all of them entered with tourist visas that obviously didn't allow them to work, yet they overstayed their tourist visa and they entered the labor market. With introduction of biometric passports for Ukraine in 2017 and for Georgia in 2019, some women also could enter Italy based on those biometric passports, but the same situation, they didn't allow to enter the labor market. Regularization instruments that those women used were sanatoria, Temporary Protection Directive, Decreto Flussi, but only one person used this, again for the reasons mentioned by Sabrina before. Also marriage, pregnancy, and EU citizenship were mentioned as instruments. Among those 20 women, 17 had children or back at home or in Italy, both those that were born in Italy or joined them in Italy. Let's move to the analysis of the interviews and speak about irregularity in general in domestic work. So we found that irregularity in domestic work is present in two dimensions. Let's say the one of the residency, so irregularity of stay, and irregularity of employment. What is very important to understand that those two dimensions, they are always interconnected. For example, without regular employment, it is almost impossible to do the residence permit and so on. Many women, as I already said, arrive in Italy with tourist visas or biometric passports, although their initial intention was to work, and in some cases settle permanently, but yet the vast majority of those women, they saw their migration project as temporary, even for although they stay in Italy for decades and decades, they still think that it's a temporary project. And even if a residence permit is obtained or through amnesties or through temporary protection or even through EU citizenship, it does not guarantee access to stable and regular employment. And this is very important findings that I would like to underline today. Employment contracts, even if they exist, they are often partial or symbolic, which means that only minimum hours are declared, while actual work is full-time and very often live-in. Again, another important thing, that access to regularization depends on employers' willingness and a goodwill to provide accommodation and the contract, often used as an instrument of support. By accommodation, I also mean not only just physical housing, but also to provide a document which is called ospitalita, that proves that the person actually lives there. So to apply for the residence permit, each person needs those two documents, a work contract and ospitalita. When a work contract is, well, it is possible to obtain it through negotiations and so on. With ospitalita, it is very, very difficult. So women are forced to look for this document elsewhere. So of course, in some great shady spheres. We use here this word negotiation because it appeared many, many times in our interviews. Women have to negotiate almost everything. Their working contracts, their work responsibilities, their working hours, their free days, their rights, and so on. Without any legal framework, without any legal support. It is easy to do it if the person knows the language and knows its own rights, but it is very difficult or impossible to do it when a person just arrived, doesn't speak the language, doesn't know what to ask for. So basically those women accept what is there. Without much negotiation. The absence of valid residence permit results in administrative invisibility, and it prevents access to healthcare, welfare, and other services. And in our sample, we somehow had quite many women who undergo cancer treatment in Italy. Some of them reported that they had to return to work right after the surgery just because they could not afford to stop, which means that if they undergo treatment, so it means that they cannot work anymore, they lose, even if they have contract, they lose the contract. If they leave with their employer, which very often happens for badante, for caregivers, they have to move out and find also so rent an apartment and pay for their treatments, and obviously they just cannot stop working. Although the treatments are free, but the recovery, the post-recovery treatments are not, because those women are not eligible for disability support because they don't have a valid residence permit. And here you can see some quotes from our field research. For example, Anastasia shares her story. She worked for the elderly person, and in this very, very toxic environment, she says, they wanted to take my passport. I slept on my money and my passport. They didn't want me to leave, because where would they find someone so stupid to work for 150 euros? And Ludmila shares also her story, because very often, most of the time, even if the contract is finally negotiated, women are expected to pay the contribution taxes by themselves from their own pocket. She says, if I pay the contribution myself, then we could proceed. Otherwise, not. I agreed. And instead of 440 euros, I started receiving 340. What is interesting about these two cases that Lyudmila is speaking about 2002. So she arrived in 2002. Anastasia arrived in 2019, 17 years later, which obviously those salaries do not exist anymore, right? And yet they do exist, especially if the person doesn't know the language, doesn't have any network support, and so on. Let's speak a bit about irregularity and how it influences living and working conditions of women. Irregularity creates complete imbalance between a worker and employer. It fosters exploitation, abuse, and subordination, and many women work basically 24 hours per 7 for a minimum pay, and they accept any job just to have a shelter, and because very often they leave where they work. So it means that if they leave the job, they also lose the housing. The home often becomes a place of exploitation. For example, housing quality, food, water, or even heating depend entirely on the goodwill and personality of the employer. They are not guaranteed, they are not checked. So we have very different stories where a woman was given an apple for dinner just because, you know, and for live-in workers, employer is expected to provide housing and food. The entire work of the work experience of those women is marked by uncertainty, because without documents they face blackmail, unpaid wages, unregistered contract, and promises never maintained. If you work well, if you behave well, we will think about the contract, but most of the time it never happens. Irregularity exposes them to labor exploitation, housing dependence, and social isolation. And the last one is very important because it is also limits their opportunities to get out, to meet people, to learn the language, to learn about their rights, and so on. And dependence on the employer is total. Often these women, they cannot afford to leave even abusive jobs, so they accept and they somehow try to make it work. Here you can also see quotes from Elena from Georgia, for example, that her grandmother, this is how they call those elderly people that they take care of, my grandmother or my grandfather. So the grandmother doesn't let me open the fridge or use hot water. That's the situation I live in. And many women report such abusive situations. Let's speak about irregularity and how it influences daily life and families of those women. The transnational families entirely depend on money sent by migrant women, yet those money are often irregular and unstable because of their precarious employment. It also means if the family depends on those every monthly payments, a woman cannot really negotiate her working conditions. So she accepts the work just to have a stable income, the minimum but stable income. Again, the lack of a residence permit or official registration prevents access to a basic welfare, not only for woman herself, but also for their families if they are with them in Italy. As I already said, finding hospitality and housing is a constant source of stress. Many women must accept abusive or exploitative conditions just to have the roof over their heads. Very often they try to find this hospitality elsewhere, and informal networks that exist, or Italian or migrant communities, they provide this rapid solution. Of course, they are not free, and they have to be exchanged or for money or for favors. Flats, because women working in cleaning, they don't live with their employers, but they rent flats, are often overcrowded or temporary, even in situation of illness and fragility. And of course, women cannot rent the whole apartment and even sometimes a room. So very often they rent just a bed in a room. A gender dimension is very important because the female body becomes an object of daily control. How to dress, how to move, how to behave. Harassment and sexualized comments are everyday experience of those women. And live-in work exposes women to constant invasion of personal and intimate space, especially in ambiguous situations involving elderly men. So those men, they are taken care of, especially if it comes to cleaning and so on. So they don't know what is normal, what is not, and it is not regulated. And they don't really have support in this case. Again, women accept these situations, especially when they need to care for children or for sick relatives. Many of our interviewees are single mothers with children, or in Italy or back in their home countries. So this economic and emotional burden of motherhood falls entirely on them. And they are accepting jobs just to have some income, the jobs that otherwise they would just refuse. A very interesting point that we discovered during our interviews was the one of racism and discrimination, because our group are white women from, okay, not from the European Union, at least, well, Polish, yes, but the majority not. White women, right? So what kind of racism and discrimination? Yet it exists. For example, some employers prevent women from learning Italian or attending courses, fearing that they might become autonomous, learn the right, meet people, learn the language, start negotiating, and so on. So they all the time they prevent them, they don't let them go out. This creates a social hierarchy where migrant women are perceived as subordinate and replaceable. You don't want to work for this money, leave. I will find 10 people that will be willing to work for this money. In workplaces, if they work with or Italian nationals or some migrants that perceived as more privileged migrants, because also this hierarchy between the migrants themselves exists, they are often assigned extra tasks or treated as inferior. In the housing market, when with their foreign accent can lead to immediate rejection. So just to sum up some general observations, we saw that all the interviewed women have lived or are living situations of vulnerability due to various intersecting factors, such as illness, violence, domestic violence, poverty, war, and so on. So add this on the situation of irregularity of stay and irregularity of working conditions, it puts them all into the situation of very extreme vulnerability. Regularization, therefore, allows them to pursue greater well-being and rights, not only on the labor market, but also across all areas of life, if it comes to education, family, and so on, health. Those dual aspects that emerged during our interview. First, employers can be both sources of support and help, and they can also be the agents of abuse or exploitation. So totally this person-person relationship and dependency. The same with family conditions. Families can promote stability, rootedness, and calmness if a woman can count on the family behind her, or the family situation can deepen vulnerability if there is a financial need, if there is a violence, so on. We also prepared some policy insight and recommendations. I don't know, do I still have
1 minute?
1 minute? Okay. So first, the importance of regularization is often not understood by both a woman working in domestic sector and her employer. So regularity has the price that is only worth paying if it brings some benefits. So it is very important to understand that regularization is not a personal favor, as many employers think. For this, we need cultural work to address the stereotypes and prejudice, first about domestic workers, second about migrant women, and this work that would help to treat domestic migrant workers with dignity, because they provide services that have to be paid for, and they have to be treated with dignity. To obtain regularization, women often must accept these exchange relationships with or Italians or fellow migrants. I already mentioned this situation with this Ospitalità document. So what is necessary here is simplification of bureaucratic procedures and elimination of their interdependence. Our interviewees demonstrated very strong agency in finding solutions and improving their own and their family situations. It is very important to promote migrant activism, solidarity, and Italian language learning, and to understand this vulnerability, this situation of vulnerability they find themselves in, always goes together with agentic practices they apply to address it. And finally, for women from the former so-called Soviet bloc, despite being perceived as white, there are specific forms of discrimination and mistreatment that also have to be addressed through cultural work and more broad conversations about this topic. Thank you. We will stop here.
Thank you very much, Sabrina and Iuliia, and we'll now open it up to questions. I'll begin with the room, and then if any of the people who are following online have a question, please either type your question in the chat, or I think there's, yeah, you could also just raise your hand and I'll see if but it's better if you kind of type a question in the chat. So I'll start with the room. Andrea?
Thanks so much for the great presentation. So I had a few questions, and then maybe later I'll have another as soon as I make it up. So you mentioned at some point that younger women tend to work as COF and older women more as live-in badante. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how age and job type could, if they shape vulnerability differently in these cases. Also, if you can talk more about agencies, so the sort of coping strategies that they develop, if any, about resistance or any sorts of forms of collective organization among them. Yeah, and maybe about the role of intermediary agencies, if there are any in this case. I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to take those first?
Sabrina, would you like to start, maybe?
Shall we divide a bit? Okay, I'm starting with the question of age.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a very important question. I think, and the age dimension is very has a strong impact, I would say, on the entire labor market of domestic and care work. What we said in the beginning was also on nationality of the workers. So I probably you refer to what I've said when I said that in the COLF, so the cleaning, you find more Filipino, Italian, and let me see again the data. And South America, I think. No, East Asian, which will be people from Sri Lanka, for example. And instead, you find in the caregiving, live-in caregiving, more of women from Eastern Europe and the Middle East. So here we have not only age, but also nationality. And it's true that women that migrated from Eastern European countries, whatever that means, with Iuliia, we are working on this definition, but just now for the sake of brevity, let's keep it that way, are also women who arrived to Italy a bit more senior as age. So they need to enter the labor market in a way which is safe, convenient to the situation, does not require that they learn Italian language, which, you know, for a more grown-up woman is not something easy to do. And so the live-in work is very attractive also because they want to save money and send almost everything they earn as remittances. It's true at the same time, and this I am saying based on my previous research, that the longer women workers stay in Italy, so after some years they stay in Italy, they try to exit from live-in work and go into live-out work. That could be, again, caregiving, but per hour, which is very rare actually, or cleaning, because this would allow them to have a private life, their own family, their own apartment, and go to the employers only for the working hours. We seldom find these tendencies among Eastern European women in general, but we do find exceptions, for example, for some national groups, which also tells us a lot about how this category of Eastern European is very homogenizing, but there are actually profound differences between one nationality and the other. So the example that we are taking now for this research is mostly women who come already of a kind of grown up and they do not stay that long or do not plan to stay that long in Italy. So also going into live out work is something that we did not witness, because although some of our own interviewees had that experience, but because they had arrived in Italy younger and they wanted to, settle with their own family and actually start a new family, and that was impossible when they were still living with employers. And maybe, I don't know, I leave it to Iuliia to talk about intermediaries and agency.
Okay. So I will continue with a question on agency strategies, because the women we spoke to, they told us many interesting stories how they themselves managed to address the situation of irregularity by claiming their rights. And then when they finally obtain their residence permit, they started, like some of them, they started helping other women to do so. So this, this sisterhood, the importance of the social networks that are created in the new place of living, and especially because they share this experiences of vulnerability, like very specific vulnerabilities because of this specific sector. It is very interesting and very important to acknowledge. What is also interesting for us, that the role of trade unions in support, providing support for those women. And sometimes the workers of those trade unions, they are they are migrants themselves. So migrants that manage to establish, to get some education, to establish themselves professionally. They know how it works. They know, because sometimes it is not linear. There are very many obstacles between the legislation and implementation, right? So they kind of know how to navigate it, and they can advise those women. So again, these this sisterhood and this solidarity between migrants in need and migrants that can provide some support and some help. And maybe I will, Sabrina, you remember this story told us by a group of women, specifically by Iuliia. Those were women who applied for their residence permit based on sanatoria from 2020, called COVID ones. So simplification of the possibility to regularize the state because of the COVID. Many people applied for the documents. They were waiting for years to get them. After 3 years, those women just couldn't stand it anymore. Of course, because of the trade union, so basically the trade union office is not only the office that provides help, but also the place where the social place for them, where they can talk, where they can, I don't know, sing, spend some times between themselves. So they decided to do something about it. They went there as a group. They started filming the office. They started demanding those documents. So, or give us our documents now, or give us the reason why, according to law, you were supposed to provide them like years ago. And they got their documents. So this was this very interesting success story where women kind of made it through. What is important that they become vocal very often only after getting their residence permit, because before it's a situation of vulnerability totally. You are afraid to speak up because you can be kicked out very easily, right? So also the documents, the residence permit gives them voice, basically.
Thank you, Andrew, and then Marina.
Thanks. I was wanting to go back to this idea of assemblages that you introduced at the start, but I didn't hear very much about it. So I just wanted to kind of two elements I was interested in, because it seems quite a fluid idea, this, with many elements of an assemblage. So I was interested in kind of power relations and what you have to say about power relations. And also, is this a theory of assemblages that you're developing? So what's the added value of this kind of assemblages approach? So I want to talk about, because in relation to power, it seemed to me, as you were talking, you kind of talk about institutions, communities, households, migrant communities and networks, and maybe also digital networks as well, connecting families. And then you've also talked about, I think, gender, racialization, patriarchy, class, labor exploitation, and also it seems into effective power in the household, almost expectations of loyalty from domestic workers because of relations of care and intimacy. So I was wondering what this research has to say about relations of power and how this kind of assemblages approach helps understand power relations. And then as a kind of a theory of assemblages or added value, what kind of relationship does this idea of the assemblage have to what I would interpret as your approach is kind of almost fairly standard feminist political economy? I would see, you're talking about unpaid, invisible, undervalued work, exploitation in a household. You've also talked a little bit about agency at the end. So I suppose it was, what is the sort of the added value of the assemblages approach within the analysis? Thanks.
Thank you. I suggest we just, if it's okay with you, we take a few questions together. Marina?
Thank you so much for your interesting presentation. Really a very important topic. And I have several questions. First of all, did you try to study links between employees and employers? I mean, how do the workers and these women find each other? What are the channels do they use? And then did you have an opportunity to observe such a phenomenon as trading by these positions? I mean, in situations when, for example, this grandfather or grandmother is quite calm, and it means that the job is not very difficult, as it might be in other cases. There are some situations which I came across in social media when these positions are just sold, just traded. Then one more question, did you try to analyze how many of such women return home, and at what age, and what are the drivers of this back migration? You have mentioned also stereotypes. Which stereotypes are most popular about this topic? And maybe one more question, has the 2022 migration case brought significant changes at this sphere?
Thank you. I'll take one more and then we'll...
So thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. My question and curiosity is about your case selection. So you said the fieldwork took place in Naples, and I was curious, why did you choose Naples? I mean, it's the context that is kind of marked with lots of irregularity, and do you think it has some implications on your findings? So in a context that is kind of infamous with irregularity, isn't it more probable to find that your interviews lead to experiences of irregularity? So thank you.
Right, just to finish off the questions in the room, I'll add my question and then we go to the online audience because it's related to what was raised before. So I'm wondering about the extent to which you actually found variations in experiences. So I mean, as far as I understood, you basically portray a picture of fairly widespread exploitation, denial of rights. And then you said at the beginning, I think you in your remarks, you say that in a way that having resident status doesn't make those problems go away necessarily. So I suppose my question is, to what extent did the conditions vary, and what particular role did legal status play, specifically in the employment conditions? I mean, I understand obviously with regard to access to services and health and the public, legal status makes a difference if you have documents, but to what extent did employment conditions vary depending on whether or not people had legal residence or whether people were working formally or informally? Thank you. And I appreciate you have a large number of questions. You can't answer everything, but I do want to turn to the online audience as well before we finish. So maybe just reasonably brief answers. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe I can start with the question from Andrew on the assemblages. Okay, so this assemblages idea, as you may already know, was an idea at the background of this project by the PI Nando Sigona and Ilse van Liemt. So it is an instrument that they're using to make the analysis at the European level. So all these 6 countries, and the assemblages is an interesting tool for them because it allows, let's say, to compare very heterogeneous entities at the multi-scalar level and also in different contexts in many ways, economic, political, cultural. So it is let's say, a perspective that puts more emphasis on the relationship, as you emphasize yourself, the question of relationship, but from different kind of enacted from different type of actors, and also it could be also in other ways pretty uncomparable. So it was, I think, a nice idea in order to keep all this research together in a situation in which, and this also answers to Martin's question, actually the actual conditions of these labor sectors are very different from one country to the other. So it's true that, for example, the research that Iuliia and myself, but also our colleague Letizia Palumbo, working on agriculture in Italy, again in Napoli, yes, also based on our own background and our theoretical background, you are right in saying that this is feminist political economy, okay? But not the same as been done by other research teams in other countries. So we will have to put this in dialogue. And so the specific theoretical lens that we use in each different context might be different, and the assemblage is the notion that is able to keep all of that together. And also the factual conditions might be different. So in terms of legal status, cleaning and caring work done in private homes can be done, in our case, by the typical overstayers of touristic visas. They come as tourists and they overstay. In other countries are asylum seekers that do these jobs in a regular or irregular way. In our countries are relatives of, so people are through reunification, family reunification. So you see that the legal conditions are very different, and also the employment conditions. So Italy is the one that has more of this live-in arrangement. And so that's why we wanted to emphasize the specific exploitation that is attached to this type of employment live-in, not only in terms of exploitation within the family where they work, but also the vulnerability that they create on these workers only in finding accommodation, having also in their personal and private life outside the workplace. And then if I can finish by explaining the Naples question. This is it's a very good question. Actually, it's a question that also we make ourselves, in the sense that we decided when we wrote the proposal to that we will be going to work on Naples based on the request of our engagement partner. And as many of you might be aware, in these large projects, next to academic partners, there are NGOs or no-profit groups working for the project. And in the case of Italy, is ActionAid that we selected and we are very happy to work with. And ActionAid suggested to work on Naples, that for them was a very interesting and fertile new research area. So we followed their suggestion, because it was also a way to empower this NGO, ActionAid, in working with us. That was one of the aims of our project. And but it's true that you are noticing that everybody will note, everyone will maybe wonder if the very large spread of irregularity in the area of Naples and other areas of Italy might be a bias in our research. And I do believe that we need to take that very much in consideration. In our we emphasize that also in our report, in our writing. But at the same time, I'm also wondering, so the phenomenon we see in Naples is let's say a normalization of the fact of irregularity. So irregularity is very spread, and people are not surprised by the fact that someone is employed in a regular way. That is not a scandal. This is also true in other parts of Italy, but then probably more than in other parts. However, this is a strong bias when you analyze the perspective of employers. But when you analyze the perspective of the migrants, their experience of irregularity is, if you want, in a sense, more spontaneous. So it's like independent from this cultural background that people may have, the Italians in the area may have. So I still believe that the narrative that we collected on also the experience of these women to finding themselves in such a, in such a setting are very, very powerful, very, very much telling. I don't know if Iuliia,
Sabrina, if you could just wrap up quite.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Sorry, no, complete your sentence if you want to say.
No, I finished. If Iuliia wants to continue on
Thank
the
you. Sorry for interrupting. Yeah, Iuliia.
No problem.
Okay, I will try to collect all the other questions into let's say one, and something that you, Marina, noticed that is indeed present, this trading jobs situation. So here again, we come back to the importance of social networks, of migrant networks that not only provide information, but also provide like offers, right? Information about the job offers. And many of those who just arrived, who didn't know anyone before arriving to Italy, they indeed bought jobs. So they had to pay someone to kind of So it's also like this informal services that you pay for to actually be sure that after your arrival you will have the place to stay and some income. So this is very much present, but also how the jobs are, let's say, advertised through this or in the social media, or also in the social places where people are gathering, like especially trade union offices, waiting in the queue for their, like for just something. They just talk between themselves. We also witnessed this with Sabrina while waiting for the appointment. So it was very interesting, like a small talk kind of conversation. So, by the way, does anyone need a job? So something like this. And about Martin's a question about how legal stays actually, what is the role of legal stays in employment. We found that basically not that much. So the legal stay does not facilitate legal employment. Yet it opens up the door, obviously, for negotiations, for looking for other opportunities, also for changing for changing spheres, right? Because it is normally the domestic work is known as a very closed, isolated sphere that is very difficult to get out. So the legal status gives this opportunity to to pursue a different future.
Thank you. We've got a few minutes left. If anybody online has a question, now is the time to. I don't see any hands going up or any text in the chat. Anybody else in the room? No. In that case, I'd like to thank Sabrina and Iuliia for the very interesting presentation. Thank everybody here in the room for your questions, and thank the online audience for joining us. And please keep an eye out, take a look at the MPC website for our upcoming seminars. Okay, thank you and have a good day.
Goodbye. Thank you again for the invitation.